Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now time for the Thursday live stream. Thank you, everybody who has joined me. It is now 9:05 p.m. in Budapest, and I have to say it's actually quite a chilly day here in Budapest. Doubtless, we'll soon be reading stories about this is the hottest June in world history, but it's actually quite chilly. You might not think it because I'm wearing a shirt, but that's just me. But it is actually quite chilly. Welcome everybody who has joined me, and as you know, there's the G7 meeting taking place in Italy. It seems like at all times there is some big international powwow. So whenever there's anything at all, there's a kind of a short news day, or a slow news day rather. There's some international bigwigs gathering to meet because they're so frightfully important. So we've just had the D-Day commemorations, and the usual cast of characters showed up. Pointedly, of course, Russia was not invited. And then we now have G7, and then of course next month we have the big meeting in Washington D.C. to celebrate this glorious 75th birthday of NATO, and this, of course, will be an occasion for yet more commitments and pledges to. It's got Tac Fury Hunter. Let's see. He's got a nice picture. Let me zoom in on the picture. I can't see. Let's see. Maybe I can see it on locals. Here we are. I can see it on locals. Holocaust Narrative by E. Michael Jones. I don't know what that is. I'm not familiar with that book, but is that a good book? but anyway, but we have this nonsense with the G7, and as you probably read, well, before we get onto the big decisions that were taken at today's meeting, we read a story in the Washington Post declaring that Biden is absolutely adamant, insistent that the statement of the G7, the final statement, says something about abortion. Quite why, I don't quite know, but it has to say so. Anne-Marie, good evening. Welcome. Always nice to see you. Thank you very much for your generosity, Anne-Marie. And hope things are well in Switzerland. But he's absolutely insistent that the final communique has something about abortion. And Giorgia Meloni, she's a little unhappy about this, and I imagine his reasoning was in order to make her unhappy, in order to put her on the spot, because none of the other foreign dignitaries care very much about the issue. Patrick Norton, welcome. But he wants to put this the G7 about reproductive rights. It's always very funny when they talk about this, so women's reproductive health and reproductive rights, and by that they mean abortion. In other words, the actual the process of non-reproduction. So we don't have my reproductive rights, which sounds great. Oh yeah, reproductive rights. I should be able to bear children if I want to. But no, by reproductive rights, I mean the actual denial of reproduction. But anyway, be that as it may, the Biden wants to, make the final statement, say something about abortion. Giorgia Meloni, who has turned into a damn squib, a completely inconsequential figure, as we always suspected, but has managed to consolidate the right in Italy. So while she continues to be categorized as far right in the media, you still get the sobriquet far right. There is the strange new respect that's now devoted to her. She enjoys strange new respect. Now you win strange new respect when you do what the powerful political media establishment wants you to do. So Marty always have a good sense of humor. He's posted a grotesque photograph of Giorgia Meloni looking shocked. It's always a lot of fun having, she's with the photographs. It's a little like Hillary Clinton. I mean, you can always find some horrific photograph when she looks, always looking in some ways, somewhat repugnant but thank you so much, Marty. Thank you for your generosity. But once she came in, and pretty much her first act was to hug and kiss Zelensky, she was embraced, because if you recall, when she won the election in September 22, there was all this agonizing beforehand that somehow she was going to join Orban in expressing skepticism towards Ukraine, and then of course it didn't happen. On the contrary, no, I'm all in. I'm in. And as I've said before, I think that Marine Le Pen will follow the same arc as Giorgia Meloni. I don't think Le Pen really has any particularly strong views. I think she wants to be president very badly. I think she seems to be quite a skilled political operator. But I don't think she's. She will follow the script, and she's already done that. She's already pretty much signed on to everything that the NATO and the EU have done on Russia and Ukraine. But she can quibble about this or that and the other. Well, I don't like sanctions, but I do like sanctions. But I don't like sanctions that hurt France. We can send, we can provide them with defensive weapons, but not offensive weapons. There's always some nonsense. Anyway, here's Takfiri Hunter, which is very interesting. He's a new member, so welcome. It says, I am the Vietnam veteran who said the other day that I could not become a member from the USA. Well, I'm now a proud Gaggler. Thank you so much, Takfiri Hunter. I'm delighted to hear it. The guy, Dr. E. Michael Jones, is great at taking on the Anglo-Zionist narrative about the Holocaust. Okay, I'm gonna take a look at that book. See if I can download it from somewhere. I'm sure there's some pirate site that I can download it from. Anthony Carroll asks, "Is this live?" Yeah, it's live. It's live. You can't get any more live than this. But anyway, so we had the whole thing with abortion, but the big news of the day is that the Americans, of course, succeeded in pushing the Europeans into getting $50 billion, either $50 billion or 50 billion euros. I'm not quite sure which one, to Ukraine via the frozen Russian assets. Now, if you recall, this had been a bone of contention. You know, there were these $300 billion dollars of frozen Russian assets, most of which was in Europe, and the Americans started pushing and saying, "Well, you got to make use of this, and give this to Ukraine." Well, this is a bit of a problem because, of course, there's questions of international law, and while it's certainly it has been done that at times of war, you freeze the assets of your adversaries. What isn't done is to get your hands on those assets and put them to your own uses, because that, of course, is theft. And in this case, it would be particularly egregious because the plan is to use these Russian assets to hand over to Ukraine, which is fighting a war against Russia, and to hand it over to Ukraine with a view to using these assets to kill Russians in Russia. That really is quite a big deal. That Judy Hotchkiss, thank you very much, Judy, says abortion is the only issue where Biden is not underwater in the U.S. He needs it for it to be brought up as much as possible anywhere he can. I agree with that. I think that the Democrats are really running with this abortion issue in the U.S. because they figure that abortion works for them. I mean, they've been running with abortion now for many years, and I've always thought that it works for them because single women, which are a very powerful Democratic bloc, and particularly single young women. I mean, the Democrats have a huge lead among single young women. They feel very strongly about abortion, and they will go to the polls in ferocious numbers for the Democrats. Right. Which is why the media are going absolutely berserk with this abortion issue. It's like abortion. And then, of course, now they're attacking Justice Alito, who, of course, wrote the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. And now they're going after Alito's wife, which is really seems totally out of bounds, because Alito's wife is just his wife. I mean, she's not a public figure. I mean, fine, you can go after her if she were a public figure, but she's just his wife. I mean, she's entitled to her views. When you don't like her views or whatever, but that you can't very well force the recusal of a justice on account of the political views of his wife. I mean, that's just it's an absurdity. So the very people who didn't think that Judge Merchan in Manhattan should recuse, and in his case, there was a grounds for recusal because not only had he personally donated to Biden, but his daughter is a big Democratic Party fundraiser and has a financial stake in the outcome of this trial. So absolutely grounds for recusal. But your wife's political views are obviously not grounds for recusal. But anyway, it's very just interesting how the media in the United States try various attacks against Donald Trump. I mean, they're obviously trying one that he's Hitler, Nazi. He's going to be arresting people en masse, sending them to concentration camps, introducing a police state, going after his political enemies. So you got that on one side. Then you've got the claim that, of course, he's going to sell out the world to Putin. That's still a ongoing thing. They're still running with the story that Trump on day one will apparently abandon Ukraine, horror upon horrors, and because he's of course so friendly to Putin. So it's in there in every single article of in the New York Times. But those arguments, and particularly the argument that Trump is a threat to democracy, January the 6th, January the 6th. I mean, they haven't really worked. They're just not. They're not working. They're not moving the numbers for Biden, and they're not moving the numbers for moving the numbers against Trump. So now, essentially, you come back to the tried and true, the hardy perennial, which is abortion. I mean, that's, they've been running with the Democrats have been running on abortion now for many, many, many years. The argument used to be that hey, the Supreme Court hangs on one vote. One vote. If we elect a Republican, the Republican is going to bring in a conservative justice, and Roe v. Wade will be gone. And eventually, it happened. So that's but now it's a little more difficult. I don't fully understand how the Democrats can run on the abortion issue, because ultimately it's now a state issue. It isn't really a federal issue anymore. I mean, you could, in theory, pass federal legislation legalizing abortion or putting some restriction on abortion up to, I don't know, whatever, 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 15 weeks, whatever. In theory, yeah, it could be a federal matter if you pass a federal abortion law, but it's not going to happen. I mean, there's just no way that Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill are going to be able to sit down and agree on some limits. The Democrats don't agree on any limits at all on abortion. None. I mean, absolutely none. So they're not going to sit down and say, okay, well, we agree on 12 weeks and that's it. And of course, many Republicans regard abortion as murder, will not agree on any abortion rights. So it's hard to see how you can get federal legislation off the ground. But what they're doing is not so much because there's this thing they're planning on a federal legislation. They want to embarrass Trump. They want to make this an issue that this is a problem for Republicans. Republicans don't know how to respond. Republicans are against all abortion rights. It's just a way of embarrassing them, that to say, hey, look, you don't recognize a woman's right to choose. You're against all abortion. Look, terrible. If you vote for the Republicans, you won't be able to have an abortion. That's more or less what it is. So it's kind of silly. I mean, you can't even say, well, you have to vote against the Republicans because otherwise, Roe v. Wade will be overturned. Now it's, hey, the Republicans, if they have their way, you'll never be able to get an abortion ever again. But anyway, so going back to the G7, so you have this thing where you have this $300 billion, 300 billion euros in frozen assets. No one knows the exact sum. And the Americans say, no, we got to give this money to Ukraine. And then all the international lawyers and the International Monetary Fund say, well, you can't really do that. I mean, it's against law. I mean, this money belongs to the Russian people. You can't just simply steal this money. I mean, we didn't even do that with Hitler. I mean, Nazi Germany's assets were frozen during World War II, but no one thought of taking this money and then using it to build British bombs with that money. And so but the Americans were very insistent, so the Europeans came up with an alternative. Yeah, well, this money is it's earning interest. It's lying there, it's earning interest. So why don't we use this interest, and we'll tax this interest, And when we tax this interest, we give this tax on the interest, we give this to Ukraine. So that way you can still say, well, that's a sort of legality. I mean, it's earning interest. We, the governments of Europe, have put a tax on this interest, and then this tax that we have raised, we're going to give that to Ukraine. Well, the Americans said right away, that's a non-starter. We're not going to tolerate that for 1 minute. And we got to use this money. This 300 billion. So now, of course, as always happens, the Americans got their way. Not wholly, but what they've now done is say, well, why don't we lend 50 billion to Ukraine, and since this is a loan and there's going to be interest to pay on the loan, this interest that Ukraine will ostensibly pay on the loan that it's received, this interest will be taken out of these assets, the interest that the assets are earning. So the assets are earning this interest, and now that interest we will take as Ukraine's interest payment. So that's 50 billion every year. Now, of course, the question arises, and I'm not sure exactly who's going to do the lending. I mean, is it the United States is going to do the lending, or the Europeans are going to do the lending? Which means who's going to get this money? Who's going to get this interest payment? But nonetheless, what's interesting is that let's say Ukraine gets this 50 billion euro loan. I mean, it's obviously not going to pay any of that back, and so if the war goes on to next year, then that's going to be another 50 billion. That's on top of all the other money that's going to be given to Ukraine. But they're not going to pay any of that back. So that's going to be the principle. And I have to assume, because there's no way in the world that any of that 300 billion will ever be returned to Russia. I mean, that's not going to happen. Just like the sanctions are never going to be lifted. I mean, those sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, they will stay in place. I mean, they might tinker around with something or other, as long as somebody, you say, hey, this is really hurting us. Can you ease on these sanctions, whatever? But it's not going. They're not going to be in the main. They're not going to be lifted. And so this 300 billion will never be returned to Russia. So therefore, this loan will affect the principal. Will eventually be taken out of the frozen assets. But in the meantime, this money, this loan, and will be used by Ukraine, presumably however they want it. I mean, either kill Russians, pay pensions, or whatever. And then this interest will be the interest that has been accruing on these funds. It's a cockamamie scheme, but there's a lot of cockamamie schemes that we go on. So that was one grotesque event. Then we had the European Court of Justice today ruled, surprise, surprise, against Hungary, claiming that Hungary hasn't complied with its obligations under European asylum laws. Well, the problem, of course, is that with these asylum laws are, of course, a fraud. I mean, because we know that the migrants are not fleeing anything. They're not seeking asylum other than from persecution or whatever, they want to enter the European Union. And the European Union knows this. The European Court of Justice knows this. The European Commission knows this. That these asylum applications are a fraud. But it's simply a mechanism to get into the European Union. Now, Hungary had not actually rejected all asylum seekers as such. They just simply said, if you want to seek asylum in Hungary, you have to apply at a Hungarian consulate somewhere. Moreover, Hungary, again, entirely in accordance with international law, declared that you apply for asylum in the first country you come to. Now, in this case, it would be Serbia. The problem with applying for asylum in Serbia is that Serbia is not in the European Union. So that doesn't really help asylum seekers. That's why they come through Serbia, and then they want to go into Hungary because Hungary is in the European Union. And because Hungary just didn't accept this and said, no, you've got to stay in Serbia, and basically then asylum seekers will try to break into Hungary, they just get shoved out. And so the European Court of Justice thumped Hungary today. I think it was 200 million euro fine. But more interestingly, they said, and as long as Hungary does not address this issue, every day is going to be fined 1 million euros. Now, you say, well, where's the money going to come from? The 1 million euros a day. Well, the money is going to come from the 20 billion euros that the EU owes Hungary, but it refuses to pay because Hungary isn't in compliance with one thing or another, rule of law, LGBTQ issues, or whatever. So there's 20 billion lying there that the EU is going to take this 1 million euros a day. They're going to take it out of that money. Well, the problem with that is that Hungary can put up with that for quite some time, because there was never really any chance that Hungary was ever going to get any of that 20 billion euros. It's like it's any more than the sanctions will ever be lifted off Russia, any more than Ukraine will ever pay off any of these loans. So basically, that 20 billion is already gone. And if you take out 1 million euros a day, that's still going to come to more than 50 years. I mean, 1 million a year, if you do your arithmetic, it's going to come to about 50 years to work its way through. I mean, because 20 billion, that's 20,000 million. So that's a lot of millions there. And so basically that's 50 years. So Hungary can live with that. It's not going to bankrupt the country. But it comes on top of this a truly grotesque event that took place yesterday. One of the creepiest, smarmiest, most unctuous, most disgusting, most vile, most loathsome humans on earth. And I'm of course talking about Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General. He came to Budapest to meet with Orban. And you kind of wonder, well, why is he coming to meet Orban? I mean, Orban's, although a member of NATO, he is, he's not exactly, a very vigorous, active member of NATO. Well, it was very interesting because they had this joint news conference afterwards, in which Stoltenberg magnanimously said, "Well, I understand Hungary's point of view. Hungary does not want to take part in arming Ukraine, doesn't want to send Hungarian soldiers in Ukraine, doesn't want the Hungarian territory to be used for transiting arms to Ukraine. However, Hungary will do nothing to thwart other members of NATO from doing everything they can for Ukraine, and Hungary accepts that the main coordination, the main organization for providing security assistance to Ukraine will be NATO." And of course, NATO is not a party to the conflict, which is Stoltenberg's go-to comment. Well, it was very strange. Why come to Budapest? Why make this pointless agreement? Because of course Hungary is not in any position to stop NATO from providing whatever to Ukraine. And Hungary is in no position to stop any NATO member from doing whatever it wants to do in Ukraine. So what exactly was the point of it? Now, I have to say, my suspicion is that Stoltenberg told him there's going to be a war soon. What can we expect from Hungary in this war? And Orban probably said, well, I can't. We're not in any position to stop this war, but don't count on us to do anything. We won't stop you. You want to fight Russia, then good luck to you. But we're not going to do anything ourselves. That's what I'm thinking, because otherwise I don't see any purpose to come to Budapest, have this news conference with Orban, in which he and Orban simply declared what we had always assumed to be the case. Hungary is not going to do anything for Ukraine. It's not going to stop anyone else from doing it, but Hungary is not in any position to stop anyone else from doing it. So I think that that's the case. Now, Orban then issued a tweet today complaining about the ruling of the European Court of Justice. They seem to care more about illegal migrants than they care about the citizens of Europe. And he's of course right about that. The point is, and what do you expect? Hungary wanted to join these organizations. They want to join the EU. That's what the EU does. The EU doesn't care, doesn't give a rat's ass about the citizens of the EU. Of course, it's very happy to bring in migrants because the EU is it's a neoliberal organization. They want the cheap labor. I read an editorial today in the Financial Times berating the EU, berating all the EU leaders, including EU leaders and Rishi Sunak, for not being welcoming to immigrants, because the EU, we badly need immigrants. Why do we badly need immigrants? There's a labor shortage. There's a dire labor. EU cannot function. We need the labor. We got to have the labor. And here the EU instead is, placating these xenophobes, these nativists like Orban, like Maloney, but we need the cheap labor. Sorry, I didn't mean cheap labor. We need the labor. Can't say cheap labor. We need the labor. Now, that's the view of the Financial Times. That's the view of the Economist. That's the view of the political establishment. And Yeah, George Soros and all the rest of them, they want to bring in cheap labor. One has to say again and again and again, there is no such thing as a labor shortage. It does not exist. It cannot happen. There is a shortage of labor that will work for ridiculously low prices. There's a shortage. There's a shortage of people who will work for nothing. Yeah. There's definitely a shortage of that. But there's no such thing as a labor shortage. And if you have a business based on the model that you can only pay your workers, $2 an hour, then maybe you should be able to think about another line of business, because then you don't really have a successful business model if you can only afford to pay your workers $2 an hour. That's it. You've got to think about something else. Now, the point is that, Orban knows this. So he sends out this tweet, the European Court of Justice, outrageous, unacceptable, and so on. And then, he welcomes Stoltenberg to Budapest. But that's it. That's what that's what NATO and the EU are about. It's a dire mistake to have joined these organizations. Anybody could have told you that. Anybody could have told you that. Because when you join, you lose your freedom, you lose your sovereignty. I mean, Orban and his spokesman, the one who was always sending out these tweets, Zoltán Kovács. Hungary has once again retained its sovereignty. Hungary has asserted its sovereignty. We are a free, independent, sovereign nation. No, you're not. You're neither free, you're neither nor independent, nor sovereign. You do as you're told. That's it. That's what comes of being in the EU. You do as you're told. Just because you say you're free, independent, sovereign. So now you're getting sucked into a war. And in exactly the same way, because Orban, we talked about this on the Gaggle. Orban, when he delivered one of his speeches recently, and he said, we had two terrible experiences, two world wars in the 20th century. In both times, Hungary was dragged into fighting a war against Russia, against its will, against its best interest, but they were dragged into it by others. We're not going to get dragged into a third war against Russia. Very, very powerful. Very good historical analogy, because you were dragged into that war by Austria. It was Austrian opportunism alongside with Germany that got Austria-Hungary into that war with Serbia. In the reasonable expectation that Russia was going to get involved, and then you got World War II. You got in exchange for the territorial gains that Hungary obtained through Hitler, when Hitler basically twice rewrote the Treaty of Trianon, and so Hungary, some of historic Hungarian territory was returned to Hungary thanks to its alliance with Hitler. But in exchange, Hungary became an ally of Hitler's against the Soviet Union, and then Hungary paid the heavy price. And he said, "No, we're not going to do it again. We're not going to do it a third time." Well, you're going to do it a third time because it's already happening. By joining NATO, by proudly declaring that you are meeting all your obligation. We're spending 2.5% of our GDP on defense. We're meeting all our NATO commitments. Welcoming that slimy bum Stoltenberg in Budapest. You're in exactly the same boat. For the third time, you're getting dragged into a war with Russia. It's just obviously, you're getting dragged in, and you have a border with Ukraine. You have Hungarians who are living in Ukraine. You're getting dragged into this war. So having you got out of the Warsaw Pact. Oh, thank God the communists have gone. Oh, we can rejoice. And all rejoicing. We got rid of the communists. And then, well, what do you now have? You now have a far worse situation. At least you had a peaceful life. All those peaceful 40 years under the communists. Now you're going back to the two world wars. The things that you thought that were well past you. Anyway, all right. Let's take a look at some of the questions. And so, first of all, Danuki, welcome. You're saying here that Russia is winning the global south. Armenia has left the CSTO chat, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Also, is the dollar dead and buried already now with the alleged expiration of the petrodollar treaty? Is this the absolute and definitive death knell of the hegemon, as it has surely been portrayed in Xenon circles? Yeah, very absolutely right. The Armenia thing is very interesting, because while you can say what you like about Pashinyan and what a terrible leader he has turned out to be, he came to power really determined to really turn against Russia, destroy Armenian-Russian relations. He led this really the country catastrophically, knowing full well that this war with Azerbaijan was coming, and seemed to make very little preparations for it. So that's that. Yeah. I mean, we can certainly condemn the leadership of Pashinyan, but on the other hand, you'd have to say this is a huge diplomatic failure on Russia's part. I mean, Russia cannot allow itself to be, just pushed around by Pashinyan. And Armenia is a very small country, and Armenia is wholly dependent on Russia. I mean, it has, about a quarter of its population lives in Russia. I mean, Armenia lives off remittances from Armenians living in Russia. Armenia totally depends on energy from Russia. And there's no question now Armenia will leave the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So today, Pashinyan said he will never visit Belarus as long as Lukashenko is there in power. He joined the Rome Statute of the ICC, which means that in theory, should Putin ever visit Armenia, Armenia will be under some kind of obligation to arrest him. Now, of course, that's not really true, but nonetheless, that's the conventional wisdom that, if you're a member, if you're a treaty member, a Rome treaty member, then you're under an obligation to arrest whoever has been indicted by the ICC. So all these are unfriendly acts. And then in the meantime, Armenia has just signed a strategic partnership agreement with the United States. Armenia, spends all this time hanging around with European, American leaders. Well, that's the Caucasus. I mean, that used to be where Russia exerted its influence, was in the Caucasus. So it was the mediator between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was the power broker between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Well, it no longer is. So, Armenia is now lost. It's now, wedded itself to the Western powers. And by now it makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, if Armenia felt, look, Russia provided us with no um, security at all against Azerbaijan. Whatever we can, however disastrous Pashinyan's leadership has been, there's no question Russia failed to stop Azerbaijan's attack. I mean, there was Azerbaijan attacked Nagorno-Karabakh, drove out all the Armenians. Azerbaijan continues to threaten Armenia, wants additional territory ceded from Armenia. Azerbaijan wants to build a land bridge between the two parts of Azerbaijan that are separated by Armenia. And it's even gone further. It's claimed that Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, is actually is an Azeri city. So clearly, Russia hasn't provided Armenia with any security. And while Russia may complain and say, "Yeah, but you accepted that Nagorno-Karabakh was belonged to Azerbaijan and so on, so you accepted it. It's not our fault, whatever." Well, Russia is the big player. Russia is the great power. Russia was the power broker between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Russia should have watched it. Russia should not have allowed, essentially, Azerbaijan to ride roughshod and just to drive out the Armenians and take over this territory. But it did, and so now Russia's influence there is very, very, it's almost non-existent. And Azerbaijan is no particular ally of Russia's. It's not like, well, we've lost Armenia, but we still got Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is also being courted by the Europeans, because Azerbaijan is very rich, is energy rich, and Europe badly needs other sources of energy now that it's cut itself off from Russia. So Azerbaijan is going to be more and more oriented towards the West. So that's the Caucasus. That's the Caucasus gone. And then if you go into Central Asia, Kazakhstan is a very dubious ally. Again, Kazakhstan is getting quite close to the West. It publicly said, we will not defy Western sanctions. So Kazakhstan, is not doing anything. So in other words, if the West say, hey, we've imposed these sanctions against Russia, please don't do anything that's contrary to our sanctions. Kazakhstan, yes, okay, that's fine. So this picture, I think, of how the global South is all gung ho and with us. I wish it was the case, but yeah. So so again, those friends of ours who hail all these great Russian diplomatic victories. Yeah, tell me where Russia has made a great diplomatic victory recently. So certainly not in the Caucasus. Cynthia, good to see you, Cynthia. So Cynthia says, so I hear Ukraine is selling organs on the black market, which is certainly a crime, but it's an even bigger crime, murder, if they're just letting incapacitated people die in order to take their organs, which is likely being done with kidneys. But to take their heart and liver, they must keep the donors artificially alive on a ventilator. Otherwise, these donor organs probably won't be viable for transplant unless the transplant recipient is nearby for surgery. Yeah, that's a very, 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 very dismal and depressing tale. This, essentially, this huge organ industry. Now, taking the heart and liver, they have to keep donors artificially alive on a ventilator. Yeah, I mean, it really is quite horrible. I don't know how feasible it is just to keep things like heart and liver alive for any length of time. I wouldn't have thought it's that doable. I mean, maybe with your kidneys or something else, but yeah, it really is. Yeah, it is uh, horrific. But we had all this at the time of the Kosovo, and there was clearly evidence that the KLA. That was that guy Dick Marty from the European Parliament who wrote a report about this. That the KLA were engaged in this international organ trade. That was, of course, hushed up. It's all been largely forgotten, but that they were engaged in it because, hey, these were our allies. So just like the Ukraine, hey, these are allies who are engaging in this quite lucrative organ trade. But yeah, it's awful. But thank you. And then Cynthia goes on. That's because a donor liver and heart can only stay viable for transplant for up to 8 to 12 hours and 4 to 6 hours, respectively. But the time limit for a donor kidney is a bit longer than that. Yeah, that's what I always thought. I actually didn't. Yeah, I didn't even. Yeah, I didn't know whether the heart is doable. I mean, I guess I was the liver is doable, but I didn't really know that it's feasible really to keep a heart alive for any length of time. So kidney is a bit longer, which is 24 to 36 hours. Be mindful, the longer any organ remains outside of the donor's body, the less viable it is for transplant. Well, of course. Here's a story on Ukraine illegally harvesting organs from incapacitated people. So, as Cynthia provides helpfully a link to RT, which to be able to read it here, maybe not in the United States, but to read it here, you need a VPN on your computer. Otherwise, you can't get it. But thank you for that link. And then let's see. There's more. Cynthia, since you're our resident movie expert, interesting. I'd be interested to hear what you think of the choices. I think I selected 5 films for the Monday night screening, and I said the theme should be political comedy. And I picked 5. I was thinking of adding Wag the Dog as a choice, but then I thought against it because, to be honest, I was a little afraid that Wag the Dog might win, and while Wag the Dog is pretty decent, I think it's a little overrated. I didn't think it was that good. It was more or less a kind of a one-joke movie. I mean, the joke was pretty good, but it was still a one-joke movie. And so after a while, it tended to get quite repetitious. But because it's now become, it's part of our lexicon, wag the dog, somehow I thought, okay, I don't think I want to watch Wag the Dog. So, but the last time I looked at how this poll was faring, it seemed like the candidate had taken an early lead. I don't know if it's going to sustain it because it's quite close. But the candidate was, I think, a very good film. I mean, it's from 1972. I think it's probably one of Robert Redford's best film because he really played to perfection the character that he liked to play, which was this bland, good-looking guy who just wanders through life effortlessly. It's because he's so good-looking that everybody wants to do something for him. And here he's this completely vacuous politician. But what was also good about that film was that it was also a satire on the new politics, because the guy he plays in The Candidate was a a kind of the new politics. He's a community activist. He's an idealist. He's tired of the old kind of political figures. He wants to help people. Not interested in winning votes. He's in the business of being active in the community. And then he turns out to be a total, totally empty, vacuous figure. So that's why I thought The Candidate was actually a very good film. But we'll see what it wins. And here we have Mary Grossman. It's good to see you, Mary. And Mary says, Giorgia Meloni seems to always running up to Ursula, latest G7, keep Biden from falling. Yeah, it's very interesting you say that, because I was thinking, I was looking at pictures on the internet today of Meloni and Ursula von der Leyen. And in every picture I see, they're all different pictures. It's the two of them, and they're always giggling. They're kind of giggling together, like they always seem to be sharing some private jokes. So in every picture, they're kind of posing, helplessly laughing about something. And I found it really obnoxious, because it seems like they're posing for photographs. I mean, they both know that the cameramen, taking snapshots of them whenever they're meeting. So the two of them are just sort of giggling, like a couple of 12-year-old girls. And it's sort of, it's just quite disgusting. But they're always together. That this little alliance between Meloni and Ursula, and Meloni is clearly suggesting that she might well support Ursula for her re-election to the top job, the president of the European Commission. I think she could. I think she will be re-elected as president of the EU Commission, and that's why I think that we shouldn't get too carried away by this whole political earthquake, because the far right has won big in the EU elections. Not really. The only thing that happened ultimately is that we realized how deeply unpopular Macron and Scholz are. They both did disastrously. But on the other hand, it's still the big winners are these, these centrist politicians, the EPP party, and that's why Ursula can look pretty confident that she's going to be re-elected. So I don't know. It's now almost like kind of a ritual that we get these elections, and then we're supposed to tear our hair out about the rise of the far right. I mean, this has been going on for years. I mean, there may be people here old enough to remember Salvini. Remember when Salvini was the rise of the far right? Look how Salvini is doing. And then, of course, the Austrians. That's an ongoing thing about the Austrians, where it's always the far right is rising. But I go back even longer. I go back to the time when Jörg Haider, who was the founder of the Freedom Party, which did quite well in this elections on Sunday. Jörg Haider was the rise of the far right, and there was a lot of hysteria about that, until he was mysteriously killed in a car accident. Well, that was very strange. Everybody's very worried about him, and then lo and behold, he dies in a car accident. So I don't know. Always. So I wouldn't. I mean, once you hand this term far right to someone like Meloni, who basically goes along with everything, or she's far right, and then you've got someone like Millet, who's basically just a shill for Israel, shill for Washington. He also is far right. Then, ultimately the term doesn't really mean anything. Anyway, so here we have. As we go back. So Anne-Marie, actually things are not really okay in Switzerland. Okay, we had some political initiatives to vote for, among other ones referring to the COVID vaccinations, demanding physical integrity and no governmental coercion for vaccination. So the government pleaded to vote against, of course. In the coming booklet, both sides explain their contra, and shockingly, 73% voted in favor of the government, i.e. against the freedom not to get vaccinated. Huh. Yeah. Well, that's awful. But it doesn't entirely surprise me. I was sort of, that's more or less what I would have expected in Switzerland. It is indeed, I mean, really shocking how easy it is to coerce people. And it's like, because the argument for the mandatory vaccinations, even never made much sense even on basis of elementary logic. I mean, leave aside the issue of legality and morality, which is you're getting coerced to pump some drugs into your body. It's your body. You've got no other body except your own. You're being forced to take these drugs. And then, because of public health. And you say, well, how does it advance public health? I mean, if I don't take the vaccine, then I'm only endangering, in theory, I'm only endangering my own health. I'm not endangering your health, because if you've taken the vaccine, and supposedly the whole point of a vaccine is that if you take it, you then are immune from the disease. That's what a vaccine does. They put a little bit of the virus in you, and then boom, your antibodies do the rest, and you're immune for the rest of your life from getting this getting the virus. So I'm not coercing, so I'm not endangering anyone else's health. In theory, I might be endangering my own health. So therefore, on what basis does the government impose this on me? I mean, this was an obvious point. And that's before it turned out that this wasn't a vaccine at all. It never was a vaccine. It was a kind of a genetic manipulation to make it seem as if this was a vaccine. It didn't work at all, not in the slightest. You didn't. It didn't prevent you from getting the virus. It didn't prevent you from transmitting the virus. It didn't work in the slightest. And yet you have these, the media and everyone banging, we got to take it again. You got to take it again. Of course, the more times you took it, the more it damaged your own natural immunity system, to the point where those people who proudly boasted that they took the vaccine 4 times, they're the ones who kept getting COVID. I took the vaccine 4 times, and I've had COVID 5 times. Congratulations! So you've got the all-time cup and league record of getting COVID more times than anyone else. So it never made the slightest sense on any level. And then, of course, you've got all the true side effects that have became clear of the vaccine. And getting more and more of the sense that suddenly with young men getting heart attacks. Obviously affecting women's fertility, and now, most shockingly, we're getting statistics about excess deaths, and these excess deaths have nothing to do with COVID, because COVID's already long in the past. So we're getting this, the excess deaths in 2023, long after COVID, and you think, well, what's the reason for these excess deaths? Well, you have the thing. These vaccinations are getting excess deaths, because it's unusual for young men to be getting heart attacks. I mean, it's not the usual thing. So this is quite shocking, and this is, at the moment it's being, you can read about it a little bit, but again, the mainstream media deliberately minimizing the news of these excess deaths, and an attempt to explain, well, how's this excess deaths? I mean, there was an attempt to explain this in the New York Times the other day. Oh, well, this is COVID has morphed into some other disease. Yeah, it's all because of COVID. That's why we have these excess deaths. No, that's not why we're getting these. COVID is a flu, not getting excess deaths because of a flu, which is now long gone. It's this genetic manipulation. So, Anne Marie, very disappointing news from Switzerland, but I can't say that I'm entirely surprised, unfortunately. Then Denaki says, why did Putin keep and praise Nabiullina, the Russian central banker, after this colossal blunder with the 300 billion? Was that snafu sheer incompetence or treason? It's a very good question. I can't see how anyone can survive when you make a mistake of that magnitude. And again, to be honest, I had been led to believe, I think we were all led to believe, that Russia had basically been dumping its dollar holdings, its euro holdings, and that day in, day out, it was minimizing its holdings of foreign currencies. I mean, that's we'd read about this, and we think, well, of course they're doing it precisely because as long as you have dollars, they have the mechanism to seize them. And that's what I thought. And so I have to say, I was really astonished when we found out that they managed to grab 300 billion. I thought, you mean you had 300 billion in the European banks? And again, we have to assume that Putin had been planning the special military operation for some time. I mean, he was talking about red lines starting around November 2021. So if you're talking about the red lines in November 2021, it means something is coming. And so therefore, if something is coming, then you get onto your central banker and say, you better start, getting, rid of these foreign currency holdings, like immediately. And so when he didn't, I mean, when it starts February the 24th, 2022, well, you have to then assume the first thing they're going to do is seize these assets. First thing. I mean, the Americans seize assets, even when they're not at war with someone. I mean, they seized Iran's assets, immediately, and they've held on to them all these years. So I wish I knew the answer, and I suspect the answer is not one that we would like. Summer Petrus, your estate, George, your estate. Good evening. And then Anne-Marie says, wasn't finished yet. So my question is, do you think it could also be that in Switzerland elections, votings are rigged, since there is a WEF and the Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, enjoys absolute immunity in Switzerland? I am absolutely convinced that the voting is indeed rigged in Switzerland. However, those numbers, it's like Trump says, too big to rig. I mean, that is so overwhelming. It's hard to believe that it could all be as a result of fraud. I think the public has been bamboozled. I think that goes for Europe. It goes in the United States. The public was bamboozled. It was bullied throughout COVID, and a lot of people just, got scared. absolutely petrified. Um, this idea of the pandemic and so on, and bought into the whole thing with the vaccine. It always seemed nonsense to me. Anyone who has any kind of a critical mind would have seen right away. Well, this is a flu. Okay, it's a bad case of the flu. Um, but the flu has been with us, since human beings have inhabited the planet. I mean, that's it. It's a upper respiratory illness, unpleasant, but not really deadly, unless you fall into one of the vulnerable categories, because you have a pre-existing condition or you're old, and so on. But still, it's just the flu. You get it, you suffer for a few days, but then you recover. And that was clear right from the start. It was obvious from the mortality figures who was vulnerable from COVID. Like people in their 80s, 90s. And that was why it was hilarious when, like, the New York Times would have this daily list of the COVID victims, and they would go through this. This person, he lived on the Upper East Side for all his life, and then said, and he was 88 years old. I said, yeah, but he's 88. You know what happens to people who are 88? They often die, and then and there's he was a veteran of World War II, and he died of COVID. He's 101. Yeah, no one lives forever. But they made it seem like, God, the heavy toll that COVID has taken, as if and you think, well, give us some, maybe a young person, and then you can say, okay, well, COVID has taken a toll. But whenever they do list a young person, yeah, but this person suffered from, I don't know, hemophilia, and those such people are unfortunately very vulnerable to diseases. So it was always a fraud, but people were coerced by it. I mean, it's like, who on earth, what idiot goes and believes that a mask will do anything? I mean, you're talking about submicroscopic particles. How the hell is a mask going to stop the transmission of submicroscopic particles? I mean, it was always nonsense. Every single aspect of it was complete nonsense. But people bought into it. And still, you walk along the street and there's always these idiots wearing their masks. So to answer your question, do I think the vote is rigged? Yes. But do I think that that the Swiss voted the other way in reality? I have my doubts. I just think that if the numbers were a little closer, yeah, but not when it's those such big numbers. So Cynthia says, to answer my question about the movies, the 5 you listed are all good choices. I don't think you need to add any more movies to the list. Okay, thank you. I hope you've voted as well, Cynthia. It's a secret ballot, so you don't have to reveal what you voted for. Marty says, I liked your recent tweet on Twitter, and I just want you to know I liked it. Oh, thank you very much, Marty. And Marty says, Elon protecting our privacy. Oh, yeah, now that's it. So this is Elon Musk, who said that now we will no longer know, in the interest of privacy, who has liked what tweet. I don't get this. Somebody must explain to me why. Marty then asks a very good question. Marty is asking, I'll get back to the Elon. Is the Gaggle movie night poll vote rigged? That's an excellent question, and I can say with absolute certitude, with my hand on my heart, the vote is not rigged. It's honest as the day is long. Well, actually, the days are quite long today, so it is honest. There's no rigging going on. At least I'm not doing any rigging. I mean, somebody else may be. There's Buddy and that bastard Apple, and they may do some rigging, but I haven't done any rigging. But there's no rig. Now, I have to say, I don't understand why this business of liking tweets is to be kept secret. I mean, do you care? I mean, liking tweets. I mean, I guess you'll now be able to, if somebody sends out a tweet with saying something obnoxious, then and you know, I don't know, whatever you say about the Holocaust or the Jews, you know the kind of things that are deemed obnoxious, and then you say like, then nobody can then come back at you. Oh, you know, so and so, you know, he put a like on that tweet, and 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 I guess that's you know, I can see why they yeah, that might be, but but I mean, ultimately, I mean, if you like a tweet, you like a tweet. I don't know whether what kind of privacy Elon thinks that he's protecting there. So, Sinok, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for your generosity. It says $50 billion to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. Is this a red line? Well, it should be a red line. I mean, it should be a red line to those who care about international law and 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 you know, like the IMF and so on. But apparently, I mean, they did say you got to act in accordance with the law, and this whole scheme that they came up with, whereby it's going to be a loan, and then the interest that Ukraine will owe us on the loan, that will come out of the interest earned on these frozen assets. So it sounds like, you know, the lawyers for the Americans and the Europeans, you know, got together with the International Monetary Fund lawyers and say, well, hey, can we work out some kind of a scheme that's in accordance with international law? I don't think it is, but I wonder what the Russians are going to do. I mean, are the Russians going to raise this matter in the international courts as to whether that's lawful? I don't know where exactly you would raise it. I mean, would you go to the European courts? I don't think you can raise it in the World Court. It doesn't sound like you could raise it in the World Courts, but maybe you could. But I mean, I think that if they try any of the other courts, in the European courts, they're going to rule against the Russians. I don't think any court in Europe is going to rule in favor of Russia. So I think they might as well stop, you know, forget about it and trying to get legal action against it. I mean, even if the World Court were to take it up, but it's very hard. World Court is really a state versus state, and it's not clear that it is exactly a state versus state issue. But even if the World Court were to take it up and were to rule in favor of Russia, it's not going to make any difference at all. So I just, you know, Russia should just forget about trying to get any legal redress in this. So anyway, let's see if you have any comments on the Rumble page. And River Deep Mountain High says, they talk of a long war. Is the real strategy to wait for Putin to die of old age? I'm certainly waiting for Biden, von der Leyen, and Stoltenberg to all drop off. Well, I think the Putin looks pretty fit. I'm assuming, who knows? So he's got, probably another 10, 15 years ahead of him. Biden obviously doesn't. I don't know about Trump either. I'm not sure Trump has that. Trump's also, now in his late 70s. But I think the goal seems to be to keep this war going. Everything. Oh, sorry. Let me take that. So suddenly this echo came on. The goal is obviously to keep this war going for as long as possible. Everything that they're doing in order to boost Ukraine's morale. Let's get as much money as possible. Let's get as much in the way of arms as possible. Let's lift this restriction. Let's lift that restriction. Everything is in order to persuade Ukraine to go on fighting. So they're getting more and more directly involved. It's clear it's direct the direct involvement. I mean, Stoltenberg no longer even pretends that he says NATO is not a party to the conflict, but everything he says now, at these, whenever he speaks, is that NATO is obviously a party to the conflict. He said NATO is coordinating the security and assistance to Ukraine. NATO is coordinating it, so therefore NATO is a party to the conflict. By using his own words, he may say however much he wants, NATO is not a party to the conflict. Obviously, NATO is a party to the conflict, and the more it continues in this way, then NATO will be in a war. I mean, the question then is, does Russia settle for this? Russia say, well, okay, well, let's just keep this war going. I think it's a very bad idea, not just because of the heavy toll this is taking. I mean, these casualties are just mounting up. I mean, today there's a story about this young woman, this young Russian woman who was a wrestler, who was going to be taking part in the Paris Olympics. And the Ukrainians want her excluded because she sent out a message, I guess on Telegram. She sent out a message because her father was killed in Ukraine, and she sent out a touching message. Goodbye, father. You are a hero. And the Ukrainians, she called her father, who was killed in Ukraine, a hero. That's a political statement. Therefore, she should be banned from the Olympics. I don't know what the scum, the vermin that comprises the IOC will do. Whether they'll ban a young woman from taking part in the Olympics because she called her dead father a hero. It's possible that they'll keep her out. But my point is only that she lost her father. And there's an awful lot of that. I mean, so the question then is, first of all, the Russians are suffering very heavy casualties. And then today, even RT reported that there's some journalists, Russian journalists, killed. They were killed inside Russia. They were killed. They were being shelled from Ukraine, and they were killed inside Russia. NTV journalists were killed. So Russians are getting killed an awful lot. So you then have to say, okay, so far the war seems to be popular. There doesn't seem to be any real anti-war movement so far in Russia. But you never know. Anti-war movements can spring out suddenly. People get fed up, and when do people get fed up? They get fed up if they don't see a pathway to victory. People can take deaths of their family members if they think, well, okay, but at the end of the road we're going to achieve a great victory, and this will be a great moment in Russian history. But if they say, I don't see a program for victory. Putin talks, we're doing this, we're doing that. I mean, he said, well, we said the other day. Just something like we captured 800 kilometers. Just in the last few months, we've captured 800 kilometers, 800 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. Now, if you do that, something like that. I mean, if you do a quick back of the envelope calculation, 800 square kilometers, that's 40 kilometers up, 20 kilometers down. A kilometer is about basically half a mile, roughly. So 20 kilometers and 10 kilometers. So that's 200, I mean, 20 meters, 10 meters. So it's basically 200 square meters. Sorry, miles. 20 miles, 10 miles. So it's about 200 square miles. Okay. Is that a lot? It doesn't sound like a lot to me. And the reason why it doesn't sound like a lot is that this should have been a time for Russia to make major gains. This is, because over the past few months, the weapons flow seems to have dried up. This should be the time for Russia to make massive gains. Again, to present NATO with a fait accompli. So, the question is, the longer this war goes on, the more NATO gets sucked in. The more NATO gets sucked in, the less likely it is that NATO is just simply going to go away. NATO is just going to accept defeat. NATO is not going to accept defeat. And NATO is not going to sign any peace agreement with Russia. They're just not going to do any favors for Russia. There's just nothing. There's not going to be any negotiation. There's not going to be any peace. So it becomes very, very difficult. And ultimately we go back to the fact this is a war that should have been won very early on. But anyway, we talked about this before, so. But anyway, River Deep Mountain High says, money to pay for Zelensky's fuel bill to fly from banquet to banquet. Yeah. Yes, he does fly a lot from banquet to banquet. So he was at the Normandy beaches, and he's obviously here in Italy, and then of course he's going to be in Switzerland. So Anne-Marie, I mean, you should report for us. Is it at the end of this week? Or maybe end of next week? The so-called peace conference without Russia in Switzerland. So Anne-Marie, you must report for us what's going on at that conference. So he's going to be in Switzerland. And then he's going to go to the big birthday bash for NATO in Washington. So you're absolutely right. This is all costing a pretty penny. And is going to. You just have to wonder how people can go on tolerating this. Sustaining casualties of this magnitude, while this buffoon, this clown, this absolute idiot Zelensky just goes, as you say, from banquet to banquet. Somebody's paying for all this. Not to mention, the property that he's purchased and everything else. And it's all being sponsored, all being engineered by outside forces, by people who are themselves doing very nicely. All those G7, all those, there's Ursula von der Leyen. She doesn't look like she misses too many meals. She doesn't look like she ever goes short, for nice dresses and nice suits to purchase, nice shoes and so on. Colonel Tai says, it was a particular mild cold. If there would have been no media campaign about it, no one would have noticed. Absolutely. I agree. It was totally a fraud. It was a fraudulent, but the media made this into some big deal. And that just wasn't really pushed back. But the people who did push back, the people said, I've lived through, Chinese flu, Hong Kong flu, I remember those things, Asian flu. They're always a little bit nasty because, again, elderly people are vulnerable, and so they take a toll. But it's something that you live through. It's part of the human condition. But they didn't want that, and then they started banning people. And then once you start banning people getting banned from Twitter, they get banning from Facebook. Then people got scared. You got frightened, because you don't know. When YouTube, no one wants to say anything. I remember when we first started doing the gaggle, and we were doing it on YouTube, and we were very nervous that we're just going to get banned, and in fact we did get we did get banned, I think, for a little while, but then we were unbanned. Never explained why we were banned. But that was then. You just say something, you talk out of turn about COVID, boom, you're gone. So it was a real terror campaign. Konohai says, in Germany, people have been prosecuted on grounds of having liked the wrong opinions on X. Musk follows German politics closely, so maybe it's about that. That's interesting. I didn't realize that's it. I hadn't heard of that. I mean, if you can provide a link to that, I mean, if you can get your hands on a link about Germans being prosecuted on grounds of having liked the wrong opinions. Yeah, maybe. I mean, there were those. I guess there were those videos. When those young Germans were singing "Ausländer raus, Ausländer raus," and I guess when they appeared on Twitter or whatever, these videos, "Ausländer raus," I guess, I mean, I'm sure the ones who were singing "Ausländer raus" were prosecuted, but then presumably if you put a like to that, you got prosecuted yourself. So I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Germany's commitment to freedom and democracy has always been very superficial. It's just that after World War II, they made all the right pious noises, all the pious noises that were expected in the contemporary liberal world. But the way Germany went about it, the way Germany enforced these contemporary liberal nostrums was through coercion. It comes naturally to Germany. So whatever it is, boom, you ban it if it's expressing the wrong view. So just because they said, okay, well, nothing to do with Nazis, nothing to do with Mein Kampf, that's absolutely all that is banned. Nothing. It's this is prohibited. But you're still in creating essentially a coercive authoritarian state. It's just that it's in the name of liberalism. And then Colonel High says, like the European court that has in 30 years 100% ruled against Russia. Yeah, exactly. They're all Nazis and look to finish the job. Yeah, I agree. I mean, any hope of Russia, going to the courts, and they've done that. I don't know why they're wasting time, why they're wasting money. You're going to lose at every level. You're going to lose at the lower level. You're going to lose at the appellate level. You're going to lose at the European Court of Justice. None of these courts is going to rule in favor of Russia. And then Edgar Nelson says it may be a forever war for all the wrong reasons. Everybody loses. Yeah, I agree. And then Konohai says every Russian that participates in the Olympics is a pathetic worm begging for scraps from the table of the Western masters. I sort of agree with you on that because it's so humiliating. Because the Russians are being told, well, you have to, if you're going to take part, you can't, compete under the flag. You can't be a part of the Russian team. It's not called a Russian team. No national anthem for you. And again, every other miscreant in the world, should we put it that way, Israel, no problem there. Flag, national anthem, national colors, but Russia not. So I agree with you about every Russian that participates in the Olympics is a pathetic worm. But I guess I have some sympathy for athletes. I mean, athletes want to compete. I mean, that's the whole point of being an athlete. You want to compete against the best. So if they want to do it, then there's nothing. I mean, the thing that I found most despicable, disgusting, was those. I forgot the name of this Russian this Russian tennis player who got some Kazakhstani rich guys to sponsor her career, her training, and everything, and then she competes as a Kazakhstani, under the Kazakhstan flag. I mean, tennis fans will remember her name, and I think she won one of these. I think one of the big Grand Slam tournaments, and there's this victory for Kazakhstan, a huge this Kazakhstani player, and it was ridiculous. She is a Russian. She's never been to Kazakhstan. She has no connections with Kazakhstan. Her family doesn't come from Kazakhstan. She just got money from Kazakhstan, and then she competes in Kazakhstan. Now that I think is absolutely despicable. I mean, yeah, you need money. I'm sure you'll accept money, but the idea that in exchange for that money, you're now going to go around saying that you're a Kazakhstani and that you've won a trophy for Kazakhstan. And then Colonel High says Geraldine Ralph is the name of the lady. No idea. From the site I read the news. I guess that's the one who was prosecuted in Germany. And then this says Edgar Nelson says it was a mini vote when likes and dislikes both operated on YouTube, but of course that's the data point too. All right, so let's go and see some more questions. There's a lot of interesting comments accumulated. This is when I do this, these letters are so small, and then people say, why don't you put your glasses on? Yeah, well, you try reading this. I mean, but anyway, I'll try not to squint because it is kind of bad look. Anyway, let's take a look. What's it? Huck the Bearer says we are controlled by money grubbers. Yeah, I think that's right. And then Hucklebearer says, I think abortion is completely drowned out by economic issues. It will be a club in better economic conditions. I think I agree. Economic issues are going to be the most important in this election. However, I do think that abortion gets people to vote. I mean, there's people just absolutely obsessed with that issue. So therefore, Biden knows that the Democrats are very unenthusiastic about him. He can't really get them to support him. They don't like him. They certainly don't like his stance on Israel. So he has to think of an issue that will mobilize his base. So abortion is one. Gun control, I'm sure he's going to bring up gun control, guns. That's another one that mobilizes his base. The Trump is this terrifying figure as a threat to democracy. I just don't. That's not really working. I don't. It's now so tired and cliched. I don't think that's going to do much. But I think abortion has worked in the past for Democrats. They just get these, these dim-witted women. They just go and vote for abortion. I mean, that's all they care about. Is abortion. And it's just it's like I don't. Living in America, I don't know how many of these dim-witted women I came across. That's all they cared about was abortion, and how these terrible Christian conservatives and Christian Republicans are going to take their abortion rights away from them. And that gets them to the polls. And I guess Biden and these Democrat consultants, that's how they make their money. Say, yeah, pitch your election on abortion. Anyway, Coop W says, "Bless up, George. Did I scare you with Dr. DC Amon Halmans, or do you get it?" No, I'm gonna definitely look into that. So thank you for that suggestion. Um, Coop W says, "My body, my choice." Oh, well, that was quickly forgotten in the COVID craze. And then Hugh Keenan, movie question: 1980, Heaven's Gate, terrible or brilliant historical accuracy? Well, I thought it was really boring. I don't think it was as bad as people said it was, but what was the yeah, I mean it broke the studio. They gave, after Cimino had delivered this huge was it, I think, United Artists, I think I think it was a United Artists, the studio that backed Heaven's Gate. But Cimino, who had delivered this big success with The Deer Hunter, they gave him a kind of a limitless budget with Heaven's Gate, and then Heaven's Gate was this massive flop. Then it was a boring film. I mean, there's no question it was a boring film. But I think it broke United Artists, and Cimino's career never recovered. As I say, I thought it was a boring film. I didn't think it was that bad, but 3 hours, it's a hard slog. Historical accuracy, I don't think it's much in by way of historical accuracy. It's the usual thing about the homesteaders. A lot of westerns are about, but I don't know whether anybody particularly wants to see Heaven's Gate. And I haven't noticed that Heaven's Gate has enjoyed any kind of rehabilitation, because some movies that are really dumped on when they come out, then some decades later enjoy a certain rehabilitation. But I haven't noticed any rehabilitation of Heaven's Gate. So, and then Casey says, the current administration in the States is absolute amateur hour. I prefer a circus to the actual clown town. Okay, that's true. The Talk Watcher says, how do we avoid a scenario where Ukraine becomes a Chechnya 2.0? I don't know how you can. At the moment, I have a very pessimistic view. I mean, I think there's no easy way to see this war coming to an end. I don't see Russia now being in a position to win this decisively. Russia would need to mobilize massively to bring enough forces into play to win the war decisively. I don't think they have the time to train, for million, 2 million man army, because by the time they got that off the ground, NATO would be involved in a very big way, and then it would be it would be unavoidable. A NATO-Russia war would be unavoidable if they started mobilizing in that way. So I think the best they can hope for, and I don't even see that's doable, which is to try and take as much of the Donbass as possible, and of course Kherson, Zaporozhye, and hope that somehow Ukraine will not be able to go on fighting. I think it's a vain hope. I think that's been the strategy for, I guess, probably since the summer of 2022, ever since Russia withdrew from Kiev. It hasn't been particularly successful. But that's all I can see. I mean, to bring this to a conclusion now would be successful conclusion now. To defeat a decisive defeat on Ukraine is now, I think, is very difficult to do without alerting NATO and really bringing NATO in full scale on a war. And then let's see. The Talk Watcher says the true U.S. government are the billionaire oligarchs who own the politicians. The oligarchs don't care about public opinion. I think so. I mean, I don't think public. I think public opinion is indeed vastly overrated. I don't think it has any impact at all on policy. I mean, public opinion has no interest at all on Ukraine, and yet Ukraine is all that our political leaders talk about. So it's just that not at no time can you have a greater disjunction between what the people feel and what the elites. The elites only talk about Ukraine, nothing else except Ukraine, which people just couldn't care less about. Torquature says, I think the sabotage events like Nord Stream are going to increase in the future. I agree. The Captain Smith says, interesting, talk about sanctions lasting forever. I wonder if Russia is going to be allowed into the Olympics or World Cup again. No. Only if there's a massive, overwhelming change in Russia. In the way, like, there was a complete change in government, like South Africa. South Africa was banned from all international sporting events until it formally liquidated apartheid, and Nelson Mandela became president. And then at that moment, again, the ban on sporting relations with South Africa came to an end. And in some ways, again, when Gorbachev basically dismantled the entire Soviet system again, okay, fine, we'll bring the Soviet Union in. So if Russia essentially liquidates itself, there's a new government that basically just allows itself to disintegrate, which could happen. Then I don't think Russia will be allowed back into any of these events. But as long as Putin is there, no. And if somebody succeeds Putin and is very similar to Putin, then no. But if somebody comes in and is a kind of a Yeltsin-like figure and just starts dismantling the entire country, which not impossible, then hey, you don't have Russia anymore, but you're in the World Cup, so cheer up. Isn't that good? You don't have a country anymore, but you can take part in the World Cup. Isn't that exciting? So Coop says Russia and the rest of the world will get back to normal shortly. Well, I don't think so. But Coop says Israel and America have to be treated like Germany after the war. Well, anyways, so The Talk Watcher says Hungary was controlled by fascists. They were allied with Nazi Germany. They were allied with Nazi Germany. They weren't quite controlled by fascists. I don't think Horthy was a fascist. How does one describe it? He was a kind of an authoritarian clerical system. I mean, he certainly, wasn't in any way. He didn't like Hitler's Nazism. He didn't want a whole bunch of this kind of rabble in charge of Hungary. I mean, keep in mind that even when after Horthy took power, remember there were these real anti-Semitic pogroms in Hungary after the overthrow of the Hungarian Soviet Republic of 1919. And boy, they really went after the Jews for about a year or two after 1919. Real pogroms. But Horthy ended it. Horthy, he supported it, encouraged it for a while, but then Horthy ended it. He didn't really like this these uncontrolled mobs ruling things. Horthy's main goal, obviously, it was very anti-Semitic regime, but he resisted the deporting the Jews for as long as possible. But once the Hungary was safe as long as it stayed as an ally of Hitler's. So Hungary remained unoccupied by the Germans as long as it was aligned with Hitler. So, it took part in the invasion of the Soviet Union, but it wasn't occupied. But what then happened was that you know, the Allies, particularly the British, kind of pushed the Hungarians to get out of the war. And Horthy was very tempted by this. You know, if you get out of the war, join the Allied side, you know, then the Allies will look after you after the war. And yeah, there were these peace feelers and so on. The one drawback to all of that was, of course, that Hitler got wind of this. That Hungary was planning to get out of the war, and Hungary is a vital piece of real estate. There was no way in the world that Hitler was just going to let Hungary go, and so Germany then in March 1944 essentially invaded Hungary to prevent essentially Hungary from leaving the war. And then, of course, you know, the fighting got quite very bitter in Hungary up until then, because, of course, then the Red Army, you know, pushed into Hungary. But my point was only that Hungary was an important piece of real estate. That's why it's very important that why did the Germans make such a ferocious last stand in Hungary, in Budapest? I mean, it was a big fight to take Budapest in the winter of 44-45, because Hungary is a vital piece of real estate. So, but the moment that Germany invaded Hungary, occupied Hungary, well, in came Adolf Eichmann, and, you know, took up residence in Budapest. And then, of course, all the Jews who had been safe up until then in Hungary were then, you know, deported to Auschwitz. So I'm saying is that Horthy, you know, wasn't a fascist when, you know, yeah, it was aligned with Hitler, and I would say, you know, Hungary has been delusional in thinking that after the war that he was going to get a break, that he was going to get to be treated decently. I mean, it was they were going to get punished, but, you know, they weren't that badly off. You know, there were worse things in the world than the Karzai regime. Anyway, anyway, Terry Jobity says BRICS Olympics the best. I guess we'll have BRICS Olympics. And then Coop W says, what's funny, George, is America is going to get Europe pounded into the ground. Yeah. So they don't have to worry about Europe becoming a threat again. Yeah. I agree. I agree. That's the plan. Talkwatcher says, how do we stop this insane march to World War III nuclear war? It's not going to stop. It's going to continue. It's obvious that they're determined on this course. They're convinced that Russia is going to back down. I don't think Russia is going to back down, but they're determined on this. And once they've embarked on this, NATO also cannot back down. So neither NATO nor Russia can back down, which means, yeah, we're heading towards war. Talkwatcher says, well, Nachlezinia says EU needs better leaders. You can say that again. The US-UK have worried about Russian-German partnership since 1918. The Germans could have gone communist after World War I and allied with the Soviets. Well, it would have been a difficult one to go communist, because they really hated the communists. I mean, the Social Democrats, who were the most powerful party after World War I, as they were before World War I, they really hated the communists. So they were happy to suppress the Spartacist revolt. But what was interesting, of course, after World War I was the tacit alliance between Weimar Germany and the new Soviet Union, and this was the collaboration that took place between the German army and the Red Army. And they helped one another. And there was the Treaty of Rapallo. So it was a very tacit. It was not in any way a kind of ideological sympathy. There was no sympathy whatever. But throughout the 1920s, Germany and the Soviet Union were kind of tacit allies. Why? Because they both wanted to overturn the post-World War I agreements. Both Germany and the Soviet Union, the inheritor of the Russian Empire, were hard done by with the post-World War I agreements. So that went on until, of course, Hitler kind of ended these agreements between Germany and the Soviet Union. So I agree that Coop says, funny, Putin wanted to be a NATO puppet. Yeah, it seems strange. And it seems strange also why he keeps bringing that up now. These were events from 25 years ago, and he said, well, I suggested to Clinton, we join NATO, and then Clinton said no, and then I suggested it to George W. Bush. He said no. I mean, it was nonsensical. The only way Russia could be a member of NATO is it has to accept American command. That's what NATO is. NATO is American command. That's why the Supreme Allied Commander, SACEUR, is always an American. It's run by the Americans. So if Russia wanted to join NATO, it would have to bring its armed forces under American command. Why would Putin continue to talk about that? Why is that? That was something desirable? You wanted your army to be under American command? You wanted America to send you as cannon fodder in these stupid wars to Iraq, and presumably down the road against China. As America watches, the rise of China, think, hey, well, why don't send the Russians to go fight the Chinese for us? And incidentally, there are many in the West, more kind of cunning strategists in the West. That's what they see. They think, basically, we should knock it off. We shouldn't be at war with Russia. We shouldn't demonize Putin. We want to use Russia against China. That's what Edward Lookback thinks. A lot of people think. I think that's what Tucker Carlson thinks. We should use Russia against China. Russia's not our enemy. I think Trump thought that in 2016. He never acted on it. He didn't either. He didn't have the skill, or he didn't have the courage, or whatever. But I think he always saw that Russia is much more useful as an ally of the United States against China. So that but if you're going to get used against China, you are going to get clobbered. They're going to use Russian manpower against China, and again, and for no reason at all, because there's really no dispute between Russia and China. I mean, whatever territorial disputes existed have all been resolved. So if Russia were to join NATO, which is what Putin said, we were rejected, the goal would be to make use of you either in the wars in the Middle East or to use your manpower against China. So I don't know why Putin says, we were rejected. Anyway, Talkwatcher says, what about the stories that bin Laden was seen in Kosovo? I never heard that one. I heard that, and I think that's been verified, that he was in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that was reported at the time. You can still find newspaper articles from the early 1990s about Osama bin Laden in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But at the time, no one really knew who Osama bin Laden was, but they would write reports about how he was very active in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that was all done. I hadn't heard the one about that he was in Kosovo. It's possible, but it's just one of those things that's a rumor. But I've never seen a confirmation of this. Casey says, on the political comedy front, I'm sure Being There from 1979 was so. Yeah, that's Being There is on the list of that you have to vote for on the gaggle. I actually thought that being there would win. But at the moment, it's it's coming in at number 5, which I'm surprised about. I thought people would would vote for being there. So, but we'll see. I mean, it's still early days. That could still change. Hugh Keenan says Russian political satire, historical satire. God, now I really can't read this because this lettering is so. Khrushchev, my car, 1998. That would be interesting. But as I said, for some reason, whenever I load up films with subtitles, the subtitles get lost on locals. Now, maybe if I load it up on Rumble, the subtitles wouldn't get lost. I'll see. But on locals, the subtitles get lost, and so it's very hard to show foreign films. The Talk Watcher says the vax worked. Talk to the hospital staff about before and after the vax. I'm not. I don't think so. I mean, those hospital staff. When I think of those hospital staff, I just think of those stupid dance videos that they did. Awful lot of those, which made me think, how much work did they actually do since they had so much time to rehearse all those dance videos? Talkwatch said that vax got the pandemic under control. That's not true. That really isn't true. I mean, the pandemic was under control once kind of people figured out who were the most vulnerable. Once they stopped using stupid ways of treatment, like shoving ventilators down people's throats. Once they stopped dumping people with COVID in nursing homes with elderly people. And once, as happens with viruses, the natural immunity system got to work. That's hence the expression herd immunity. The immunity systems got to work, and gradually the virus became, the people built up a resistance against the virus. That's always the case. It's all, how have all viruses been defeated in the past? People built up the natural immunity. People got the virus, they built up an immunity, and they didn't get the virus again. And then, as the virus mutates to try to fight off the immunity, it gets milder and milder. And that was it. So it was never the vax. There's no evidence at all that the vax ever had any effect on the pandemic. Claire says vaccines don't prevent infection, never have. Well, I don't know. I thought that's the whole point of vaccines. And then Nahalizine says, well, it gave immunity to the makers of the gene therapy. Yep, that's the key. The immunity. Who got the immunity? Not the people who took the vaccine, but the manufacturers who got immunity. Now, again, if it's such a great vaccine, why do you need the immunity? And but that's it. All the big pharmaceuticals, they got the immunity, and they made out like bandits. And then the home care staff discussed. Yeah, the point about the democide is that they dump these people. They dump people into nursing homes. I don't know what the hell they were thinking, but if you dump people with COVID into nursing homes with elderly people, yeah, it led to mass deaths. I mean, that was a stupid thing to do, and that's what resulted in those spike in death numbers in those early months of 2020, and then of course, after about April 2020, the mortalities started going down long before the vaccine. And as I say, I mean, it's viruses act as viruses. People have always said viruses. It's bad at first, but there is such a thing as herd immunity. Gradually people build up the immunity, and the virus, becomes, essentially less and less lethal to its hosts. All right. So, pom, pom, pom. Some of these are all the things that we've already gone over. Anyway, Mary Grossman says, I did not get the COVID vaccine, as I now can believe any conspiracy theory per my psychiatrist, head of Mayo Clinic, blah, blah, blah. And now his own practice said I was abused by the medical system, plus they are incompetent in every field. They were giving me a chemical lobotomy, but I escaped. Sounds unreal, but it is all documented. Yeah, I think that I don't think there's anyone who didn't take the vaccine who now regrets his decision. I think that's important. Those who said, I'm not going to take the vaccine. I don't think any one person who says, God, if only I'd taken the vaccine. I wish I had. There's not one person that says that. El Croc says, all voting achieves in a uniparty system is to provide the excuse of losers' consent for the bar stewards that want to rule over us. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, it's the losers' consent. That's well put. Yeah, that's it. Hey, you lost, and then there's all the quick cases like in America. I mean, you now have a system where no one really believes an election result. No one will ever believe an election result because you've manipulated the system in such a way that there's no integrity whatsoever in elections, and that's been done deliberately. I mean, these voter rolls, they haven't been cleaned up in years. And you think, well, that should be the first civic duty of government to clean up election rolls. But there's been ferocious resistance to cleaning up election rolls. So nobody knows, and particularly in a country like America, which is a very mobile society, people move all the time. So people's just names are just there forever. People have been long dead. Their names are still on the voter rolls, and you just can't do anything about it. You can't do anything to clean those voter rolls. And then we can't ask for voter ID because that's apparently racist. And so you got a system that is, and then you've brought in this mail-in voting, very difficult now to get rid of. It's there, boom, it's set in stone, mail-in, and which of course guarantees without proper security. And then you say, well, now we'll have an election, and you have to accept the outcome. So I don't think anyone's going to accept any election result, particularly as the 2024 election, the presidential election, is likely to be very close. I mean, who's going to accept it? Who's going to accept that result? And then James Kelman says, good afternoon from Ontario. Okay, that's right. Thank you. That's nice to have friends in Ontario. And Richard Phillips says, the IOC has been scum for a long time. Totally corrupt. Yeah, I agree. Meg Gallucci, welcome from Baltimore. So, I see some people joining us from YouTube, which is very good and welcome. But I want to make a pitch. Please join our locals platform, because you get a lot of great content. We have great gagglers who post a lot of fascinating content. I mean, Danaki, every day he posts so much great information. I'm always learning so much from Danaki's postings. I mean, really, he just susses out such great, fascinating information. So, there's all the time, every day, there's a lot of fresh content, and then we have the podcasts, we have the movies, and we have interesting guests. So please, if you're joining via YouTube, join locals. You know, subscribe, please. Um, that's that's how we keep this going. It's hard, to do it, but if you can subscribe, that would be great. You don't have to. You can join locals without subscribing, but you miss out on content if you don't subscribe. And we need we need subscribers. This is all audience subscribers. We don't have George Soros bankrolling us. We don't have big advertisers. And so, if you can subscribe, I really appreciate it. And Cynthia says, I thought you might be able to see who votes for what film, George. So it's nice to know that you can't. Not that I'd mind much if you could. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe there is a way to do it. I don't know, but it would be too complicated for me to figure out how you can find out, and I don't want to. I mean, I think it's a secret ballot, and I think people's secrecy or people's privacy should be respected. So I have no interest in finding out who voted for what. So. Meg Galucci says, a lot of people say that Putin will act assertively in the war, yet he never has. So where's the evidence? I agree. I think you put it, you put my thoughts very eloquently in just a few words. A lot of people say, Putin's going to do this, Putin's going to do that, and these big things is really going to escalate and show everyone vote for. He hasn't done it so far. So why should one assume that things will change? One can hope that things will change, but on the basis of his actions so far, he hasn't done it. And then local 923 says, what happened with Petrushov? Was he sidelined? Yeah, I think that's I think he has been sidelined. But it's very hard. I mean, people just they appear, they disappear. So yeah, it's it's hard to know what happens to these characters. I don't even understand why somebody just emerges as a key figure at some points. And then Richard Phillips says, in a coordinated campaign across 14 states, the German police on Tuesday raided the homes of 36 people accused of hasteful postings over social media. Yeah. Very, very, very troubling. I mean, all this, 14 states. It's a coordinated across 14 states. 36 people. Imagine they've got nothing else. There's a high level of criminality now in Germany. People are aware of the increasing rise in criminality. People are bringing this up, as did that young woman from Alternative for Deutschland, and I think she's being prosecuted. The one who tweeted out government statistics that show a correlation between immigrants and crime. That the high level of immigrants taking part in crime. She tweeted this out. She was quoting German government statistics, but she was a member of the AfD, and she's being prosecuted. It's and I think it wasn't just crime. I mean, specifically rape. The high propensity of rape among immigrants in Germany, because she's being prosecuted. Government statistics. She didn't even say anything. She didn't say Ausländer raus. She just said, here are government statistics about immigrants and rape. Meg Galucha says, democracy and Germany are opposites. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. The incompletist says they ushered in a do not resusc orders on elderly, vulnerable too, and the elderly homes Medusalan scam too. Yeah, there were a lot of scams. Yeah, no question. It boosted the mortality rates very unnaturally during those early months. And then Dan Rock says even the tennis players in the French Open with the pathetic childish idea of not having their flags displaced. Some of them even live in the States. Yeah, I agree. And and the Denrock talks about the Kazakhstan player. Again, I mean, that's the one I was talking about, who she's from Moscow, has no connection with Kazakhstan. No parents, grandparents, no one had any connection with Kazakhstan. She won Wimbledon when the Russians were banned from going. Yeah, that was that year when the Russians were banned. Yeah, Sino says her name is Elena Rybakina. Yeah, Rybakina. She still plays. So I always root against her. I mean, she may be a very nice girl, but I think it's disgusting to do that. You play for another country for money. I mean, that's all. Just you've basically been bought and paid for. You're playing for another country for money. That's just not your country. And Marcus says, George, you're climbing out of my screen. I'm sorry about that, and I know it doesn't look particularly appealing, but this lettering and it's this white lettering against a black background is always very hard to read. Anyway, Don 570 says, have you seen Harold Lloyd film A Sammy in Siberia, 1919? Sammy in Siberia, an inept American soldier stationed in Russia during that country becomes separated from his unit. I haven't seen that film, but let me look that up. That might be an interesting one for us, because that's let me write it down so that I don't forget. Harold Lloyd, A Sammy in Siberia. I mean, we don't do too much by way of silent movies, but I always feel no one will bother showing up, and so but let me look at that. So Anne Marie says, I don't think COVID is actually the flu, though not much worse in regard to lethality. I believe in the gain of function theory, i.e. that the virus was concocted in the Wuhan lab with the help of Dr. Fauci, who is actually questioned. Yeah. I don't really disagree with that, but it was still concocted, but it's still the flu. They just made it more lethal and contagious than the normal flu, but still basically the flu. I mean, I do think that the origin of COVID was the Wuhan lab, and that's the Chinese in cahoots with the Americans. I mean, it was both the Chinese and the Americans were responsible for that. So Rupert Fellow says Putin is as popular as ever amongst Russians. That's true. I mean, at the moment that is, and that's working in Putin's favor. But the trouble is that you can't guarantee that. Public opinion is fickle. Can't always guarantee that they're going to stick by it. Like in America, Vietnam was popular until it wasn't. There suddenly becomes a breaking point when the public turns against the war, and it's usually for that same reason. They don't see a path to victory, and if they don't see a path to victory, then they say enough. We're not going to waste any more lives on this. You don't have a plan for winning. There's no way that we're going to win this war. So let's cut a deal now. If it means we haven't won, we haven't won, but at least you know, the ones who are our sons who are still alive, at least they'll stay alive. And you don't know at what point that the critical mass takes. So, Russia in World War One, was doing pretty well. 1916, 1917, complete collapse. So I wouldn't. So just that. Oh, Putin's very popular at the moment. So James Coleman says, for democracy to actually work, you need more than a two-party system. As we see in the U.S., left-wing and right-wing are the same corrupt disease bird. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of ingredients to a democracy. And I think, incidentally, that having more than two parties doesn't do anything. I mean, Europe, we have so many different parties, and they're all much of a muchness. I mean, they're all kind of interchangeable, mildly center left, and then then there's got the Greens, and then you got some mild center right, and then the slightly more right, and then I mean they're still once you kind of create the system like the proportional representation, then you're just going to have lots of parties, but that doesn't add anything to democracy. Who cares the fact that you've got all these parties and then you have to build these coalitions and they all start fighting among themselves about the spoils. Anyway, Cynthia says, just let Olympic athletes compete without any ties to a particular country. That should finally put a stop to all bickering and ridiculous dispute that take place between the countries at the Olympics. That's a very, you're right. It's never made any sense why any kind of international athletic events, particularly when you have individuals like individual runners or long jumpers or high jumpers, why they have to they have the flag. It's never really made sense, but nonetheless, the Olympics, since this return of the Olympic movement back in the late 19th century, it's been kind of a national thing, always the flag, that's that somehow you win a gold medal for your country. It just doesn't make any much sense, but that's the way it is now. So that's never going to end. I think it's disgusting. I mean, the way Russia has been treated. And again, as I said earlier, I understand why individual athletes say, okay, well, I want to compete. I want to compete against the best. Because that's what I do. I only have a small window of a few years when I can be among the best, and I want to take part. I don't care whether I can perform, under my national flag. I just want to be there. So I understand it, but it is humiliating. Anyway. So Cynthia then goes on, just let Olympic athletes compete without any ties to a particular country. Yeah, and I read this one. I thought it was a different one. Danrock says, as for fascists, let's remember Churchill supported the Greek fascists against the very people who were fighting the Germans. Yeah, that's right. Back in the Civil War. And against the communists, and of course that was the Civil War that Stalin kept out of. So hey, we agreed that Greece would be in the British sphere of influence. Eventually, it was the American sphere of influence. So we're not going to intervene against the fascists. All right. Well, I think my time is up. I think I've been talking for quite a while. Just if there's anything else. Yeah. So anyway, maybe I didn't come to everything, but thank you everybody who has joined me. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for all your comments and your criticisms and suggestions. We will be back. We're going to do a few more podcasts over the weekend, and we'll be back what was it? Just a minute. Another film for you to write down. This is some of Petrus. You know, even as I'm leaving, somebody says, another film for you to write down and evaluate the resurrection. Let me write this down. The resurrection of Zachary Wheeler. You know, I have to say, I have never even heard of this film. So that's 1971. These, you know, there were a lot of kind of strange films that were made around that time. They had titles like that. It does feature an early Leslie Nielsen, and you expect to give him some damn deadpan quip throughout. Yeah, I'm going to take a look at that. That might that resurrection of Zachary Wheeler. Let me look at that. That might be a good choice for us. Anyway, so thank you everybody. Thank you above all to those who generously contributed, because we need this money to keep it going, and above all, we need it to still the loud barking and bad temper of those two hounds who hate me with a passion because they think I'm lazy and incompetent, and then they yell at me about my poor performance. So just to get them off my back, I really appreciate donations. We need them. But anyway, thank you so much. Have a good weekend. We'll be back next Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then. Bye.